All right, this is Lamentations 2 in the MacArthur Study Bible and the Endearing Word Commentary. All right, a little refresher from 1. Basically, Jeremiah gives his first lament in chapter 1, weeping over the fall of Jerusalem, and even Jerusalem is personified in the other part of chapter 1, basically wanting somebody to just feel sorrow for her, but nobody does, and the enemies are rejoicing over the fall. And there you go. That's what you pretty much have, and even a call for justice against their enemies, that the Lord would vindicate his people also. All right, so that was chapter 1. And then chapter 2 basically is the second lament, and specifically it's going to look at the anger of the Lord. And the first 10 verses will have the Lord's perspective, and then 11 through 19 a human's perspective, and then 20 through 22 Jeremiah's prayer. So I'll start with the first 11 like I did last time. Just split it up in half, and then I'll read the other half after I get through the first 11. Alright, but the first section in the Endearing Word Commentary is God as the enemy of Jerusalem, and the first 5 verses deal with the Lord as Jerusalem's enemy, and then 6 through 7 the Lord destroys his own tabernacle, and then actually get to the second section of the chapter in verses starting in verse 8, and then I'll just read all that other stuff when I get to it. Alright, so I'll start. Alright, so the first 11 verses. How the Lord has covered the daughter of Zion with the cloud in his anger. He has cast down from heaven to the earth the beauty of Israel, and did not remember his footstool in the day of his anger. The Lord has swallowed up and has not pitied all the dwelling places of Jacob. He has thrown down in his wrath the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. He has brought them down to the ground. He has profaned the kingdom and its princes. He has cut off in fierce anger every horn of Israel. He has drawn back his right hand from before the enemy, and he has blazed against Jacob like a flaming fire, devouring all around. And standing like an enemy, he has bent his bow with his right hand like an adversary. He has slain all who were pleasing to his eye on the tent of the daughter of Zion. He has poured out his fury like fire. The Lord was like an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel. He has swallowed up all of her palaces. He has destroyed her strongholds, and has increased mourning and lamentation in the daughter of Judah. And he has done violence to his tabernacle, as if it were a garden. He has destroyed his place of assembly. The Lord has caused the appointed feasts and Sabbaths to be forgotten in Zion. In his burning indignation, he has spurned the king and the priest. The Lord has spurned his altar. He has abandoned his sanctuary. He has given up the walls of her palace. So he has given up the walls of her palace into the hand of the enemy. They have made a noise in the house of the Lord as on the day of a set feast. And the Lord has purposed to destroy the wall of the daughter of Zion. He has stretched out a line. He has not withdrawn his hand from destroying, and therefore he has caused the rampart and wall to lament. They languished together. Her gates have sunk into the ground. He has destroyed and broken her bars. Her king and her princes are among the nations. The law is no more, and her prophets find no vision from the Lord. And the elders of the daughters of Zion sit on the ground and keep in silence. They throw dust on their heads and gird themselves with sackcloth. The virgins of Jerusalem bow their heads to the ground. My eyes fail with tears. My heart is troubled. My bile is poured on the ground because of the destruction of the daughter of my people, because the children and the infants faint in the streets of the city. Okay. So the first 5 verses, the Lord is seen as Jerusalem's enemy. All right. So verse 1, how the Lord has covered the daughter of Zion with the cloud in his anger. So in previous generations, Jerusalem knew the cloud of God's glory. 1 Kings 8 verses 10 through 12. And Ezekiel saw the cloud of glory depart from the city under judgment in Ezekiel 10. And now Jeremiah laments the presence of a cloud, not a cloud of glory, but a cloud of anger. And MacArthur says much in Lamentations 2 actually depicts God's judgment in vivid portrayals. He covered the Judeans with the cloud. He withdrew his hand of protection, and he bent his bow and is slain with arrows. He stretched out a surveyor's line to mark the walls to be destroyed, and he will work a rebuilding of Jerusalem in the future kingdom. Zechariah 2 verses 1 through 13. And Enduring Word says this. So Clark says, the women in the eastern countries wear veils, and often very costly ones, but here Zion is represented as being veiled by the hand of God's judgment. And what is the veil? It's a dark cloud by which she is entirely obscured. And then Morgan says, neither Jehovah nor the daughter of Zion is conceived of as departed or destroyed. She is covered by a cloud, and so cut off from the vision of Jehovah, that she cannot see him. Clouds hide God from men, and they never hide men from God. Yep, the beauty of Israel. Yep, he is cast down from heaven to the earth, the beauty of Israel, and did not remember his footstool in the day of his anger. So MacArthur says the beauty of Israel, it likely refers to Mount Zion and the temple. And his footstool refers to the Ark of the Covenant, as indicated by 1 Corinthians 28:2 and Psalm 99:5 and 132:7. And Poole says in the Enduring Word, the earth is called the Lord's footstool also. Isaiah 66:1 and Matthew 5:35 and Acts 7:49. But here the temple is understood, called God's footstool. And 1 Chronicles 28:2, and the whole temple seems rather to be understood than the ark. So, well, even though MacArthur says the ark, but I guess here Poole was saying it's actually the temple. But anyway, just different interpretations. Yep. But basically, even the temple and the ark and all that, yeah, it all got destroyed whenever the Babylonians came in. All right, verse 2. He has thrown down in his wrath the strongholds of the daughter of Judah, and he has brought them down to the ground. So MacArthur says again, the Lord had cast down the bastions of Judah's defense, as he told Jeremiah he would do from the outset of his ministry, Jeremiah 1:10. And then Enduring Word says that he has thrown down in his wrath the strongholds. This begins a long series of he has statements. And the emphasis is again on the idea that all of this destruction comes from God. Even if it was through the instrument of the Babylonian army. Yeah, but it was really God who caused this destruction because of Judah's sins. He just used the Babylonians as just an instrument to execute judgment. Now, whenever it says daughter of Judah or daughter of Zion, what does that actually mean here? What's the point of using these titles here? Well, Harrison says this. They're actually privileged titles, yet that privilege carries with it great responsibility. For many generations, God's people thought only in terms of the privilege and not of the responsibility. The nation had imagined that it occupied a privileged position because it stood in covenant relationship with God, yes, but it was seemingly unaware that such status involved important obligations in the moral and spiritual realm, i.e., basically you better be obeying God's commandments. Yeah, and the reason this judgment happened is because they weren't obeying God's commandments. Yeah, that was part of the Mosaic covenant. You would be blessed if you were obedient, but you would be cursed if you were disobedient. All right. And then now verse 3, he has cut off in fierce anger every horn of Israel. He has drawn back his right hand from before the enemy, and he has blazed against Jacob like a flaming fire, devouring all around. And MacArthur says basically whenever it says that he has cut off in his fierce anger every horn, this is serving as an emblem of power, as exemplified in animals. And I know even Daniel uses the word horn as well in Daniel 7. But anyway. So it's just saying how the Lord has brought destruction upon the people, and just using very poetic language just to continue to describe it. And then verse 4, standing like an enemy, he has bent his bow. So Enduring Word says that Jeremiah saw that God treated Jerusalem as an enemy, like an adversary. His skill and strength, with his right hand, was against them and not for him. So God was against them, because of their sin. And then this guy, Philip Graham Ryken, says, in a strange twist on the Old Testament motif of the divine warrior, God was not fighting for his people, but against them. And then Poole says, that is, God, whom by their sins they have provoked and made their enemy, behaved himself as an enemy, bending his bow and stretching out his right hand, and slew their young men and maidens, who were pleasant to look upon, and had brought judgments upon them like fire, which devours without any discrimination. And, so Poole said that. And then MacArthur actually sums up verses 6 through 11. He says, tragedy comes to everything and everyone through sin. Tragedy comes to everything and everyone through sin. The account mentions the temple where the Israelites came to worship, and also the feasts and the Sabbaths, leaders such as the king and priests, his altar and his holy places, the city walls, law, children, and family. And then I'll look at those now specifically. So now the Lord destroys his own tabernacle. Verse 6, he has done violence to his tabernacle. So Enduring Word says that his temple was referred to as a tabernacle, just as sometimes the tabernacle was referred to as a temple, and they were just simply various ways of describing the house of God, his place of assembly, where God would dwell amongst his people. And MacArthur has a reference back to chapter 1, verse 4 here, where basically, where God resides, in Zion, where the temple was built. On Mount Zion. Just referring back to that, but even God has destroyed his own dwelling place. And sadly, the dwelling place got profaned. There was idolatry going on in there too, sadly. And then also the feasts and the Sabbaths are to be forgotten in Zion. And Enduring Word says, when the temple and the city were destroyed, so were all the observances and the institutions connected with them. The feasts and the Sabbaths were no longer observed. His altar was rejected. His sanctuary was abandoned. Her palaces were given into the hand of the enemy. And now you get to verse 7. Lord has spurned his altar, abandoned his sanctuary. Given it up to the enemy, as just talked about. They have made a noise in the house of the Lord as on the day of a set feast. So MacArthur says a shout of triumph in the captured temple resembled the joyous celebrations in the same place as the solemn feasts. And then Enduring Word says the sound of shouting and noise and commotion was common on the day of a set feast, but now they heard the sound from enemies who set the city in subjection. So the enemies are rejoicing instead of the people. The Babylonians. All right. And then the second section in the Enduring Word commentary, a city reacts to the judgment of God. And then verses 8 through 9, the first part of 9, the defenses of the city react. And there's no notes for MacArthur for these, so these will be straight from the commentary until I get to verse 11. All right. So the Lord has purposed to destroy the wall of the daughter of Zion. So Jerusalem's wall was its security. Once the wall was destroyed, the city was prey for anyone and everyone. God purposed to destroy, and the purpose was declared, and it was declared fulfilled in Lamentations 2 verse 17. So I'll get to that. He has stretched out a line. So the idea that God did his work with careful measuring and precision, and there was nothing accidental or haphazard about it. And John Trapp says a line basically of destruction, or a leveling line. See 2 Kings 21 verse 13 and Isaiah 34:11. Jerusalem was built by a line, and so it was destroyed by him who doeth all things and measure, weight, and the number, weight, and measure. So God was precise and on point with his judgment. Nothing was messed up at all. Nothing was accidental or haphazard. It was all planned. And Harrison says, just as a builder measured levels carefully in the process of construction, so God had been equally precise in the work of demolition to ensure that one stone did not stand on top of another. Yep, and even Jesus said in Matthew 24, when he said that the temple would be destroyed in the coming days, he said not one stone is going to be left on top of another. So there you go, since the Jews rejected Jesus. And Jerusalem was destroyed again in 70 AD by the Romans. Alright, her gates have sunk into the ground. This is verse 9. And he has destroyed and broken her bars. So the walls were destroyed, the gates were sunk, and the bars protecting the city were broken. Alright, and then the second part of verse 9, now 9b through 10, the people of the city react. So her king and her princes are among the nations. The law is no more, her prophets find no vision from the Lord. So the royalty and the nobles have been taken into Babylon, and government institutions had disappeared, and they were of no help. Yeah, because even leaders got taken as well. The law is no more, her prophets find no vision from the Lord. And the spiritual institutions had also failed, and they could give no help. There were no faithful priests to teach the law. Yeah, because pretty much all the priests were corrupt themselves, and the prophets were silent. Yeah, well, Jeremiah was really the only one at the time. Yeah, and Trapp says Jeremiah was alone and happily thought when he saw all ruined that he should prophesy no more. Ezekiel and Daniel were far remote, and there was no small affliction that is here complained of. Yeah, well, Ezekiel and Daniel were already in exile by the time the destruction of Jerusalem happened. Yeah, because people were being deported little by little before the destruction of the city happened. Yep, and Ezekiel was prophesying while he was in exile. Yep, and then Daniel was still just a pretty young man at the time, really before he became a prophet. So, but he would eventually. So really, Jeremiah was really the only true prophet really left in the city of Jerusalem before it all fell. So, anyway, yep. And the elders of the daughter of Zion sit on the ground, and they keep silence. So verse 10. So the leaders of the community were stunned into silence and of no help. All they could do was just mourn. Yeah, they throw dust on their heads, and they gird themselves with sackcloth, which would be a sign of mourning. And the virgins of Jerusalem bow their heads to the ground. So the younger generation was also of no help. All they could do was just bow their heads to the ground in despair. Yeah, just no hope by the looks of it. All right, and now verse 11. So the prophet Jeremiah reacts, and he says this, "My eyes fail with tears, my heart is troubled, my bile is poured on the ground because of the destruction of the daughter of my people, because the children and the infants faint in the streets of the city." So, Endearing Word says, all of this made Jeremiah undone with everything that he's seen. His eyes wept, his heart broke, his bile poured out in nausea. He saw the city's destruction, especially the effect on the children and the infants, and he reacted this way. He just kept weeping. And then Poole says this whole verse is but expressive of the prophet's great affliction for the miseries come upon the Jews, which he said would happen, but he's not happy about it. He wept himself almost blind. His passion had disturbed his bodily humors, that his bowels were troubled, his gall lying under his liver. Upon this disturbance was vomited up, and there are no more than, and they are all no more than just expressions of very great affliction and sorrow, according to Matthew Poole. And that's what's meant by the bile there. I guess just feeling so bad that even his insides are not doing so well, just so overcome with sorrow. He said that my bile was poured on the ground. Just all that. Just very descriptive of his sorrow. Alright, and then specifically Harrison talks about the bile being poured on the ground. More literally, bile is liver. In particular, liver, I guess the Hebrew word kabed, it means heavy. The liver is actually the weightiest organ of the human body, on the inside. And it was held in antiquity to be one of the locales of physic life. Being associated with profound emotional reactions, generally of depressive nature. Anyway. Alright. And then you get to verses 12 through 22. So I'll go ahead and read those, and then I'll continue with the rest. They say to their mothers, "Where is grain and wine?" as they swoon like the wounded in the streets of the city, as their life is poured out in their mother's bosom. How shall I console you? To whom shall I liken you, O daughter of Jerusalem? What shall I compare with you, that I may comfort you, O virgin daughter of Zion? For your ruin is spread wide as the sea. Who can heal you? Your prophets have seen for you false and deceptive visions. They have not uncovered your iniquity to bring back your captives, but have envisioned for you false prophecies and delusions. And all who pass by clap their hands at you. They hiss and shake their heads at the daughter of Jerusalem. Is this the city that is called the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth? All of your enemies have opened their mouth against you. They hiss and gnash their teeth. They say, "We have swallowed her up. Surely this is the day we have waited for. We have found it. We have seen it." The Lord has done what he has purposed. He has fulfilled his word, which he commanded in the days of old. He has thrown down and has not pitied. He has caused an enemy to rejoice over you. He has exalted the horn of your adversaries. Their heart cried out to the Lord. O wall of the daughter of Zion, let tears run down like a river day and night. Get yourself no relief, give your eyes no rest. Arise, cry out in the night, at the beginning of the watches. Pour out your heart like water before the face of the Lord. Lift your hands toward him for the life of your young children who faint from hunger at the head of every street. See this, O Lord, and consider. To whom have you done this? Should the women eat their offspring, the children they have cuddled? Should the priest and the prophet be slain in the sanctuary of the Lord? Young and old lie on the ground in the streets, and many virgins and my virgins and my young men have fallen by the sword. You have slain them in the day of your anger. You have slaughtered and not pitied. You have invited as to a feast day the terrors that surround me. In the day of the Lord's anger there was no refugee or survivor. Those who I have borne and brought up, my enemies have destroyed. Okay, so verse 12. They say to their mothers, where is the grain and wine? As they swoon like the wounded in the streets of the city, as their life is poured out in their mother's bosom. So this is a description of Babylon's invasion. The description of Babylon's invasion depicted the reality of a hungry child dying in its mother's arms as a result. No food for the child. So that's what MacArthur says. Yep. And Endearing Word says this: Jeremiah saw children fall to the ground as if they had been shot with an arrow. They collapsed as their life is poured out in their mother's bosom. Yep. And the children and the infants faint in the streets. So Harrison says this pathetic and tragic scene stands in stark contrast to the ideal of happy, carefree children playing in the streets of Jerusalem, a situation which is promised when the nation is restored. Zechariah 8:5. All right, and then the third section of Jeremiah's lament, lamentation, basically is longing to comfort a forsaken city. So verses 13 through 14, false prophets cannot comfort Jerusalem. So how shall I console you, comfort you? To whom shall I liken you, O daughter of Jerusalem? What shall I compare you? What shall I compare with you that I may comfort you? So, Endearing Word says again, Jeremiah has often spoke of Jerusalem being without comfort. Now he finds himself unable to comfort the devastated city. Jerusalem's ruin is spread as wide as the sea, and it could not be helped. Your ruin is spread wide as the sea. Who can heal you? And Harrison says, divine retribution has burst in on Zion in the same manner as the sea forces its way through a gap in the protective wall. And then verse 14, your prophets have seen for you false and deceptive visions. So MacArthur says, as Jeremiah 23 verses 16 and 17 indicates, these lies spoke of peace and comfort and not judgment. Yep. And Jeremiah 23:30 through 40 shows how such lying led to destruction. I'm not going to turn there now. You can go there if you want to. Anyway, and then Endearing Word again. There were many false prophets in the last days of Judah, according to both Jeremiah and Ezekiel. They promised that God would rescue Jerusalem and Judah from the Babylonians and that he would quickly bring back your captives. But these were all false prophecies and delusions. Yeah, aren't you glad that there's not false prophets today prophesying peace, and good things when there is none? Oh, wait. No. Okay, I'm not going to go there because I could. I've already addressed some of that in past videos, but moving on. All right. And then verses 15 through 16, friends and foes cannot comfort Jerusalem. And here's a little quick note from Harrison. The normal order of the Hebrew consonants, ayin and pei, in the acrostic structure of the poem is actually reversed in this verse. In verse 16. As in the two subsequent dirges for unknown reasons. In verse 16. Because as I said in the intro, basically, as MacArthur said in the intro, The Hebrew is written in an acrostic, so it goes in the Hebrew. It goes in alphabetical order in the Hebrew for the 22 verses for the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. But here the sequence is reversed in verse 16. Yeah, and then I guess it goes back to normal in the other ones. I don't know, because I don't really know my Hebrew. I'm just seeing what others have to say about it. All right, but anyway, so 16, well, starting with 15, and then I'll get to 16. All who pass by clap their hands at you, and they hiss and shake their heads at the daughter of Jerusalem. Yep. Is this the city that is called the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth? So, verse 15, all who pass by clap their hands at you. So this was not applause. It was a mournful reaction fitting to those who hiss and shake their heads. And all who saw it were astonished at the city that was once marked by beauty and joy. But also, of course, you got the enemies celebrating. So, and that's in verse 16. All of your enemies have opened their mouth against you. They hiss and gnash their teeth. They say, we have swallowed her up. Surely this is the day we have waited for. We have found it. We have seen it. So this was the triumphant cry of Jerusalem's enemies. They waited long for the day of her conquest, and now they were happy to have seen it. Clark says, Jerusalem was the envy of the surrounding nations. They longed for its destruction, and they rejoiced when it took place. Yeah, well, eventually these enemies rejoicing, they would be destroyed also. Yeah, so your celebration ain't going to last very long. All right, and then the fourth section from Endearing Word, and the last one, God's purpose in the day of the Lord's anger. All right, verse 17. The judgment of Jerusalem as what God purposed. The Lord has done what he has purposed. He has fulfilled his word, which he commanded in the days of old. He has thrown down and has not pitied. He has caused an enemy to rejoice over you. He has exalted the horn of your adversaries. So MacArthur says, the enemy that gloats in verses 15 and 16 should recognize that the destruction was actually the work of the sovereign God. And this verse is the focal point of this chapter, that the destruction happened as God planned. It was of God. Yep. And then I guess there's a cross-reference to Jeremiah 51 verse 12. I'll go ahead and turn to that one just to see what it says. Yeah, 51 verse 12. Yeah, set up the standard on the walls of Babylon. Yeah, make the guard strong, set up the watchmen, prepare the ambushes, for the Lord has both devised and done what he spoke against the inhabitants of Babylon. Yeah, so even the Lord would even bring about the fall of Babylon as well. Yeah, well, the Lord planned the fall of his people here, but even he planned the fall even of the very people that he used to bring judgment on his people. So Babylon eventually fell too. So, but the point is that nations rise and fall as the Lord decrees. He plans it. He causes it to happen. Yeah, but he restored his people. Yeah, he restored his covenant people. Yeah, since he had that covenant with Abraham that all the nations would be blessed through them. And then, of course, the promise of the Messiah, which would come through David. Those promises. And also because great is thy faithfulness. which is coming up in chapter 3, so stay tuned. All right. So, Enduring Word says, Jeremiah announced God's purpose in Lamentations 2, verse 8. The Lord has purposed to destroy the wall of the daughter of Zion. In the judgment upon Jerusalem and Judah, Yahweh has fulfilled what he purposed, and Yahweh fulfilled what he purposed and has fulfilled his word. He has caused an enemy to rejoice over you. So if Jerusalem had remained faithful to Yahweh, no enemy would have conquered them. Yeah, and that was actually one of the curses, that if they were disobedient, then God would raise up enemies to conquer them. Yeah, that happened in the book of Judges also. Yeah, it even happened in Kings and all that, where they would be oppressed by enemies because of their disobedience. Yet, because of their persistent sin and rebellion, God had exalted the horn of their adversaries. So, adversaries coming in and having power over them, basically. As was just talked about, horn being just a symbol of power or whatever. Alright, and then verses 18 through 19. The prayer of Jerusalem's enemies. Their hearts have cried out to the Lord. O wall of the daughter of Zion, let tears run down like a river night and day. Give yourself no relief. Give your eyes no rest. Alright, so wall of the daughter of Zion. So MacArthur says, the penetrated walls of Jerusalem cried out in anguish at that they've been broached by the Babylonians. Of course, not literally. This is just personification. But anyway, just to show the tragedy of the destruction of Jerusalem. And then, of course, this is just a taunting prayer of enemies here. So, Enduring Word says, this is a taunting prayer of the enemies rejoicing over Jerusalem, as in the previous lines. In verses 15 and 16, they wanted Jerusalem to just weep forever. All right. And lift your hands towards him for the life of your young children, who faint for hunger at the head of every street. So Enduring Word again says, the enemies of Jerusalem were happy by the sight of people of the city crying out in prayer, pleading for their young children and perishing from hunger. And Harrison says, the dying children seem to have crawled from their homes toward the main city streets in a desperate though vain service for food. A personified Zion turns away in shock from this horrible scene with a desperate plea to God. All right. And then now you get to verses 20 through 22, the agony of the perishing city. See, Lord, and consider to whom you have done this. Should the women eat their offspring, the children they have cuddled? Should the priest and prophet be slain in the sanctuary of the Lord? So MacArthur says the chapter closes by placing the issue before God, basically for God to see all this and consider. To whom you have done this. Should the children eat their offspring? Hunger became so desperate in the 18th month siege that the women eventually resorted to the unbelievable. They resorted to even eating their own children. So you had cannibalism. Because during the siege, they pretty much started to run out of food and all that, and they got so desperate that they resorted to cannibalism, sadly. All right, and Enduring Word adds on and says, Jerusalem's agonized cry to God asked him to consider the city and the people that he loved. And he considered God to consider the depths of their agony, including the cannibalism and the death of the priest and the prophet. And Trapp says about the cannibalism, the women eating their children, that they did so in the siege of Jerusalem by the Chaldees, the Babylonians. Yeah, it appeareth by this question, in the famine of Samaria under King Joram or Jehoram in 2 Kings 6, they did likewise, as also at the last destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 AD, according to Trapp. Okay. And then 21, young and old lie on the ground in the streets. My virgins and my young men have fallen by the sword. You have slain them in the day of your anger. You have slaughtered and not pitied. So, the day of the anger, MacArthur says this actually describes the complete slaughter, as does 2 Chronicles 36, verse 17. Let me go ahead and turn there real quick, since this is pretty much the end of the chapter. So, I got some time. So, 36, verse 17. See if I can find it. Here it is. And therefore he brought against them the king of the Chaldeans, who killed their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion on young men or virgin or aged, or the aged or the weak. He gave them all into his hand. All right. So that's the day of the Lord's anger. All right, and that's all of MacArthur. All right, and endearing word finishes this off. So Jerusalem personified knew it was all the deserved judgment of God. It was Yahweh who invited a collection of terrors to surround Jerusalem. And all of those sustained by Jerusalem, those who I have born and brought up, they've been destroyed by her enemies. And that's verse 22. My virgins and my young men have fallen by the sword. And Harrison says the slaughter of the young men and women were particularly serious because it precluded the appearing of another generation, making it, I guess, seem like pretty much there would not be another generation, probably. But of course that's not true, since they get restored later on. And you have invited as to a feast day, and Clark says perhaps the figure is the collecting of the people in Jerusalem on one of the solemn annual feasts, and God has called terrors together to the feast on Jerusalem, similar to the convocation of the people from all parts of the land to one of the annual festivals. So basically God calling in all the terrors to come upon them, as God would, I guess, call the people to come to the feasts, basically. All right. So that's actually the end of Lamentations 2. And Lord willing, I'll get to chapter 3 next time, and I may have to split 3 up into 2 parts, so I'll just see what happens, since there's 66 verses. So Lord willing, I'll get to 3, but until then, may God bless you, and the grace and mercy won by Jesus, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all.